Yeah, all right. So we have a presentation that we are told in the script of this movie that there is no medical or neurological etiology that would explain what happened. So at that point, the only thing that a clinician could do, whether it's this group, whether it's any group that's currently in the hospital, is to deem that psychological variables are central to the presentation, right? Because if what he's presenting with is a psychosomatic illness, it has to be because every illness is psychosomatic. When you remove the somatic etiology as an unknown, the only thing you could look at and address to help your patient would be the psychological. And at that point in the algorithm, we could deem this being psychogenic. Do we think our patient is lying to us? Actually, I stated the question wrong. Is there evidence in the script of this movie that the patient is lying to us? That he's making a conscious effort to deceive us? No. And without such evidence, we have to think that this is a subconsciously motivated behavior. And that's irrespective of what we think. So if that's the case, we're really dealing with two disorders. What are the two disorders right now that are in our differential? What's going on with this character? Somatic symptom disorder. What's the other one? Conversion disorder. In one case, the individual will present with some deficit in motor and or sensory function. And in the other case, it's any other function but motor / sensory. And since we're dealing with what appears to be motor function and a worsening paralysis, conversion disorder right now would be the provisional diagnosis. Right. At this point in the algorithm, if you're a healthcare provider, what do? Let's say we are a psych consultant, and let's say we see him in the hospital during this particular stay, that is, that which is demonstrated or depicted in the film. And we're huddled. What do we do next? CBT. We do not have any CBT resources as part of our service. So you're right. I would actually love that, but we're not going to be able to do that while inpatient.
Reassurance and education.
Reassurance, patient and family, right? The other thing I think we need to remind ourselves about is that if the initial evaluation does not uncover the somatic etiology, that we should not be so quick to jump to conclusions that it'll never be disclosed. We have to have some humility here. Right? Isn't that what happens in this movie? This movie becomes a very, very critical teaching point that your provisional diagnosis is just that, provisional. And once we realize that what's happening is the direct and physiologic effect of a substance, then we're not going to call this conversion disorder. But we're going to call this a behavioral disturbance or the sequelae of a toxin. So I think this movie really hits that point home. As a treatment team, we've got to be very careful of our provisional diagnosis and just allowing that to continue. And instead being flexible with regard to incorporating new information, such as when a father tells us that he was just told that his son has been poisoned. Now, he doesn't do that, of course, but that's where our minds have to be as clinicians nonetheless. Anything else about this particular character other than his presentation? Again, what if we walked into that room and we see him walking to that window? Now, it's his sister that does it, but there is a scene where he does it too, and these symptoms appear to remit. And let's say they remit at a point where we're out of the room, we forgot our stethoscope. Don't know why psychiatrists is carrying one in the first place, but we walk back in the room and retrieve it, and we see this. And we think, oh boy, he's lying. Caught him. Now what?
Yeah, it seems we should really explore that further. Like,
What are we going to
I
explore?
don't mean like kind of like attacking and like really questions like, well, what happened? Like, obviously you can walk now and you couldn't 5 minutes ago. Like, what changed? But like, kind of just
So,
investigate it.
further history,
Yeah.
non-judgmental? Sure. And what are we trying to get at? What are we seeking in our history taking that will allow us to further differentiate what's going on that has created a differential diagnosis? Yeah, right? What his motivation or gain is. Because if we then discover that he and his parents just took out a $10 million insurance policy, boy, that external incentive can be deemed as guiding his behavior. And if so, what condition are we discussing right now? Right. In the absence of anything like that, in the absence of any external reward, we have to assume the reward is internal, that is subconscious. And with that being the case, this is what? Fictitious. And then what would we call it when we realize that it isn't, I'm forgetting his name, but Bob? That poisoned him, but happens to be his own father.
Oh, you mean Martin?
Martin.
That poisoned Bob.
Martin, I'm sorry, Martin. It isn't Martin that poisoned him, but instead it's his father. Munchausen's a fictitious disorder imposed on another, formerly known as by proxy. I'm not sure which wording you'll see on your shelf exam, so just memorize both. Right? But without evidence of his lying, both fictitious and malingering are off the table. Considered, but off the table here. Anything else about Bob here?
I would say towards the end, it kind of seems like he's like longing for approval by his father. Like, oh, like I knew I should have come here. So I actually want to be a cardiologist, not an ophthalmologist. So like, I don't know.
What about that? I picked up on that too.
He's gonna teach him to kill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that change in behavior is externally motivated. This child's manipulative. I'm not so sure he wants to be a cardiologist. I'm not even sure he wants to be a doctor. I am sure he wants to live.
Well, he's clearly favored by the mom.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, his father definitely claims, or definitely favors Kim, and you could kind of see that throughout the movie. Like earlier when Anna says, the mom says that, like, oh, you know, he said he wanted to be an ophthalmologist. Steven says Bob would be a coal miner if you were one too, basically like resentfully being like, oh, well, you know, he'd be whatever you want to be. So then it's funny that at the end, Bob picks up on that. So that's why his last resort is to cut his hair, try to water the plants like he was supposed to.
As he's crawling to water the plants.
That was a really sad scene.
Very sad. This is a child who regrets his relationship with his father, and if it weren't for the fact that his father was going to literally choose whether he lives or dies, he would have the same relationship with his dad, and we can just imagine where that goes to as an adult. Anything else with regards to, and again, very similar to what we discussed just last hour, very similar to what we discussed this morning. All three of our works today focused on child-parent relationships, and not the most adaptive of relationships either. It starts with Elaine and her father. In the past hour, we looked at, of course, what happened to Danny Torrance in relationship to Jack, and that's a relationship that we had to peek in as early as 1980. And now this. Another very, very maladaptive relationship. And that really comes to a head with regard to the final scene. Any other observations about this child? Bob? What are the characters?
Oh man, all of them. I don't know what the
What order do you want?
Kim, I forget what the name of like this Stockholm syndrome, like not in the sense of like you've been like held hostage and like you have to kind of like make it seem like, you know, this is what you want, and you're like kind of like developing a very meaningful relationship with your attacker, abuse, or whatever, but like she clearly developed some sort of relationship with Martin, even though she knew that he was like putting all this stress and everything on to her and her family. So
True.
And even that last glance back,
Yeah.
in literally the final scene, you wonder what that's all about. So again, for shelf purposes, Martin's tied up, and we see Kim reacting to him. She then is the captor. So the captor falling for their victim, that is the Lima syndrome. However, the larger picture is that despite him being tied up, she is the victim. She's the one, along with her family, for the captives. That is the Stockholm syndrome. And quite frankly, both are playing out simultaneously. She's both captive and captor. They don't have a name for that yet.
Right.
Now, at least that one is comparing their example. Be familiar with the Lima syndrome. Be familiar with its opposite, which is the Stockholm syndrome. Either can appear in your example.
I found a mini theory that I thought was particularly interesting. So, as we established earlier, Stephen, the dad, favors Kim versus the mom almost. When you watch it a few times, it just seems like she has some kind of resentment towards Kim. Maybe the way she favors her son, and they don't really connect with each other, the mom and her. And one of the theories is that Stephen was possibly sexually abusing Kim, which is why in that first, very uncomfortable scene where Anna is laying down in that weird, anesthesia position, when she's alone with Martin, she takes off her clothes the same way and then lays in the bed in a motionless position. Why would she know how to do that? Mm-hmm. And that could also explain why Anna might be resentful, because she's taking away the attention of the, and that could be another reason why she was like, oh, well, we could just have another kid, because, presumably she'd pick, or, they pick one of the kids and they're easily replaceable, and that's what you wouldn't expect out of a mother.
You would definitely not expect that of a mother. Even that particular scene surprised me. With regard to your theory, it is interesting how this shapes up. We have a patriarch who is abusing alcohol, who abuses alcohol during the job, puts his job and therefore his family in jeopardy, and might even be sexually abusing his child. Have you heard this before?
The Shining.
That's a Shining. Right.
Well, this film particularly is very Kubrick-esque, because there's a lot of shots of farther away and down hallways that. Most of the reviews in this were saying oh my gosh, this is so much like The Shining because of the angles and some of the dialogue and the shots of their face and the soundtrack and everything.
And certainly the patriarchal main character certainly is a trope.
A bit unrelated. Before the scene where Martin and Steve, whatever, when Martin goes, the first there's the paralysis in the limbs, then there's a refusal to eat, and then there's blood in eyes, bloody eyes, blah 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 blah. And because before that, all of the kids were together and they had a puberty conversation, and even though Bob's, he's 11 years old, 12 years old, something like that, 11. And he asked Martin, personal questions like that. I assume, and then when all of the stress occurred and he collapsed and stuff like that, the first thing that I thought of was, what if he's just so, what if he's the one kid in class who's really short, who hasn't hit puberty yet, and he's just so stressed out that his body just physically, it's clear a somatic symptom type situation, you know what I mean? Because they in the movie they brought up sexual stuff all the time. It was a lot of points to where it was just really uncomfortable.
I think with those risk factors in place, the behavior might still result in the diagnosis of conversion disorder. The conversion disorder is very complex with regard to what is going on in the unconscious or the subconscious. And you're relating some potential events for Bob might actually be the etiology of his conversion symptoms. That said, again, what does this relate in terms of what we usually struggle with on CL? You can see how complex a nature this could be. A CL psychiatrist is really a diagnostician here. With regard to real therapeutics, it's got to be psychotherapy. I mean, this entire family would benefit from psychotherapy. But we might even get a little look into what the treatment planning for the psychotherapy would be for Bob. It probably would be related to sexual development, intimacy, etc.
I would say going off of that point, I also think like Steve, whatever his name is, might have been sexually assaulted. Because like if we talk about like in the hospital where he's like, Bob, you could tell me a secret, I'll tell you one of mine, and like that whole like story of the whole dad thing, like that just doesn't seem like something a child would do unless they were probed by an adult at an earlier time. Like I don't know, that doesn't seem like normal child behavior. So that, and then if you take the theory that he sexually assaulted Kim, it's just kind of like going down the lines of like, I had this trauma, so now I'm going to inflict this onto you because I don't know any better, and then like all this stuff, and it's just like he thinks that Bob is holding a secret because he's been holding a secret, and that allowed him to act out the way that he did, so it's kind of just like recurring. But,
Yeah, I think on the surface, we're looking at a father who believes his son is lying and is wishing that he's faking the symptoms, that this is malingering.
Yeah.
Therefore, let me give him a safe space. But the irony is that this father may not have given his son a safe space in years because of the trauma. And that his asking or playing this game with his son has a much deeper, sinister context than just trying to get his son to confess that this is all a ruse and I'm fine and I'm helping so that his father could feel better.
And the very first, like, you know, because the movie's really split in half. The first half is very robotic and they don't really talk with any emotion, and then the second half is very emotional. And like the first emotional thing we hear is when Steven goes to Martin's house and bangs on the door, and the shocking thing he says, he goes, I'm gonna open the door and I'll fuck you and your mother just the way you want it, which was like, what did he just say? But also it's like the fact that he interprets Martin trying to get close to him as a father figure to like sex somehow, or like using a sexual threat. It's very bizarre, and it's like it continues with the whole theme of what about him and his father, and now him and his children. It's odd. It's disturbing.
Which does clarify the behavior even earlier, which is when this boy befriends you as a physician. What are you thinking? And then when you recognize that he happens to be the son of a patient that died on the table and you were the anesthesiologist, I mean...
Or he was the heart surgeon, and then there's...
I'm sorry, he's the heart surgeon, sorry, he was the cardiothoracic surgeon. You know, if you didn't get it, which would be ethical step one, you sure as heck should have gotten it when it was disclosed that he is the son of a deceased patient. But ethics, of course, are just flushed down the toilet in this particular movie.
yeah.
for this doc. Again, he was an impaired physician, in addition. But, you know, you're sitting there as a member of the audience thinking, why would he have kept in touch with this boy? And maybe we actually get, again, a very unfortunate, sinister answer to that.
Well, and I think that makes sense now, and like thinking about it, that makes a lot more sense. But like definitely the other part of it is he sees it as a way of like atoning for his sins, but without actually acknowledging that it's his fault ever. But it's funny because I kept track the second time I watched this. Every single time that he says something like nice to Martin or invites him to go somewhere, it's directly after Martin says something about his dad or about his mom, or that, oh well, I haven't done this since my dad died or something. So, and I think Martin knows that. He's almost like trying to give him a chance to actually acknowledge what he's done and apologize and actually try to make amends and sort of guilt him. But then he offers something meaningless, like, oh, I'll come meet my family, or I'll drive to your house this one time, or here's a watch, all these meaningless things to try to get rid of his own guilt.
When So I thought about Martin, I just lost it. Oh, yeah, with regard to the cardiothoracic surgeon, when he told his wife that he was just reaching out and trying to help the child, did you believe him? I mean, it was tough to actually hear that and think, oh, well, that makes sense, because it still didn't feel quite right for him to have done, I mean, going to their house for dinner.
He also kept it in secret.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is also like,
I
wow,
mean,
why would you do
when
that?
I was the first like however many of us we found out who he was, like what relationship he had, I thought it was gonna be like his estranged son.
Yeah, me too.
So
Right.
you kind of get this vibe where he's trying to keep it a secret because he doesn't want people to know that he killed someone on the operating table, and because he was impaired, he doesn't want it to get out.
And that's like all he cares about, really.
Yeah.
I think even more immediately, I mean, his not telling his wife there is the externalized superego. I mean, if he would say this out loud, hey, these are my plans tonight, I mean, who in this room wouldn't shout no? Right? I mean, his wife would shout just a little bit louder too. And that's the reason why he doesn't tell his wife. I mean, forget who down at the table for a second. He doesn't tell his wife because his superego is on vacation. His superego is fragmented, right? It's weak. And as such, he is going to keep this to himself. He follows the impulse. He follows the id wish. He is guided by the pleasure principle. And if he were to tell his wife would certainly fill the role of what his superego should be doing. And that's telling him, do not go. Do not befriend this child. Do not go to his mother's home. And quite frankly, come to the other 15 things you are going to do in the tour. Right? But that's the immediate reason why he doesn't tell his wife. His wife is the externalized superego. That part of his personality, the part of the personality that this particular character does not have. It's weak, for whatever reason.
Really quickly going back to the sexual assault conversation, there was this one specific scene where Kim was on the motorcycle with Martin, and it was very, they showed her face, she was like tearing up, blah, 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 blah. And then she came home, the mom was watering the plants, and she was like, oh, I was at Claire's. Anyway, so when she was on the motorcycle, I was like, girl, you're 14. You're 14, this kid's allegedly 16, something's wrong, something happened before, because a lot of my friends, back when we were 14, 15, they would do the same exact thing, and it always ended the same way, terribly. And all of these friends, something happened to them before, it doesn't matter, trauma happened. And so it just really seems like a huge possibility that something happened to him, That's it.
And again, we could talk about Kim's evolution, the development of her own superego. Where does our superego come from? And this is some parts of this may actually appear on your shelf exam. Where does it come from?
Society and parental teachings.
Was the second part of that?
I said society and parental teachings.
Yeah, parental teachings first, right? We don't extend to society until the parents begin the development of our superego, probably at or around the age of 2, toilet training. First time we're ever told no, right? It's when the parental prohibitions are internalized, when you're told no. Before that, mom and dad were perfect, right? So it was say yes. And then that gets extended, teachers, etc., right? Other aspects of society outside of the home, those parental extenders. But superego begins with the parents' prohibitions internalized. So now we look at Kim, who's 14, and we see that she's got a weak superego. Why would she do this? Why would she follow her impulse and make such a bad decision? And we could trace that all the way back to 2. Because when she began to interact with her parents, and certainly during child development at or around the age of 2, I would suggest that the parents were not modeling the correct superego. There's no strong superego. So there was nothing to internalize in the first place. And so this kind of relates back to early childhood development. Of course, we wouldn't be proven right, and this is why we take developmental history, until we see aspects of what kid was doing 5, 7, 9 that may be additional examples of her having a weak superego.
Also, everybody was smoking. And I was waiting for Bob to start smoking, honestly. Well, it didn't happen, but it was just like, at first it was a little bit, and then it was just constant.
Yeah, like every
Like
other
there was a
scene.
cigarette and basically every.
Yeah, I thought we were getting like the Rachel Soldano. You've been smoking your own cigarettes, at least tell me that, because the poison was in the cigarettes. But we never got the Shutter Island reference.
Yeah.
Right? So, because Bob is the first to actually become sick, and he's the one who's not smoking. So I was figuring out where in the world this poison came from.
Well, and it's funny because in that scene where Martin's telling him like what's going on, he says like, Bob will get sick, Kim will get sick, and your wife will get sick, all in the same order. That it actually winds up happening. Although the wife never gets sick, which I just think is interesting that they didn't show that part. At least her starting to get sick. Oh, and then the other thing I noticed was like going back to like the sexual assault theme. It's interesting that when Anna is talking to the anesthesiologist and is just filling him in, I think it was the anesthesiologist, and it's just like, oh, well, you know, our son is good, plays the piano and normal stuff. And then he goes, oh, well, how's Kim? And then Steven just goes, oh, she just started menstruating like last week. And that's very bizarre. He has no filter, very bizarre, and it's just, why would he say, why is that the first thing that comes to his head? Why? And especially because we just saw a scene where he was like, where she was singing, and that he was like, oh, you know, your choir and all that. Why would he not share that? That's interesting. Why is that not?
Well, but you have your answer. I mean, again,
Yeah.
when is this is Bob?
Steven, like the dad.
Steve, okay. So, you know, when Steven has that information about what just happened to his daughter, that's something that's out there. But it's likely to remain in the subconscious that his dad don't bring up in the context of a quote-unquote normal conversation, because our super egos do not allow for it. So, but without a strong super ego, these id impulses come to conscious expression and therefore do get discharged. They do get expressed. And that's what we see here.
Yeah, and then, oh, sorry.
That's it.
No, I was just gonna say that,
Weak
and
super ego, right?
And then Kim starts to develop into that, because then she says stuff like, to Bob, she just goes, can I have your MP3 player when you're dead, like, please? And just says a bunch of other stuff.
Please.
Yeah, she said 3 times. Yeah, there are a lot of, I noticed that, really good picking up on that,
They do
because
that a
there are
lot.
threes.
They constantly either do it 2 or 3 times.
They'll say like something, 2 or 3.
It's an easy decision for her.
And that's why, you know, she's like, oh, well, I'll sacrifice myself when she tries to run away. But she's only saying that to further guilt the father. You can tell it's not genuine.
How much time left that?
It's both equal.
It's 50 days. All right, so in the next couple of minutes, let's end at 1 o'clock sharp. Anybody have any idea what the toxin is?
I honestly didn't think that it was a poison at all. I thought it was just like Martin performing some sort of like witchcraft on them.
Rasputin?
But that's some like Greek mythology thing. I like
Yeah.
Googled like the.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's Trojan War.
Yeah, I couldn't figure it out. I didn't. Even if you try to wrap your head around if there was like a poison or something was given to them that they got sick, it just kind of didn't land.
I know what Dr. Toby's gonna say. I
Paralysis.
already know what he's
I
gonna say.
don't know, because I may be completely wrong, because at the end when like what's the mom's name? I keep forgetting.
Anna. I know, I kept
Anna.
forgetting too.
At the end when she like kissed his literal bloody feet, and I was like, what if like he's slipping his blood into, I don't know, you know what I mean? Because it was obviously it was bizarre, but it's definitely possible.
I thought that was more of like, well, that could definitely be double meaning, but I think the whole thing is that like he's supposed to represent a god, and so that's why there's that scene where she's kissing his feet. I think that's more thematic of that, but that could still be true. I mean, we don't know. But I know that you have a theory, and I know what theory it is because I was looking at all the theories of it. I know which one.
What is your theory?
I know like we're supposed to see this in like a, well, what could the toxin or like something be? I just purely interpret it as like that he's supposed to be some sort of god, and I like can't think of.
This movie's about faith. It is.
Yeah, I mean, but
however, when you look
yeah.
at paralysis, anorexia, and then the vasculitis, that's dapsone toxicity, right? In 3 cases with dapsone. And what's really interesting is that when you look at the vasculitis, the hemolytic anemia, those that have greater risk are those that have a deficit in, and I'm going to get this enzyme wrong, glucose 6. G6PD, right? Which is sex-linked, which is why the son goes first.
Oh.
Right? I mean, it has some heritability here. And the mom's a carrier, right? The mom's a carrier, so with dapsone, she's going to go with Golette, she's a carrier. As far as Plymouth's concerned, probable mutation. I mean, the preponderance is males, but women, in this case, a young woman like Kim, can get the vasculitis, can get the hemolytic anemia as well, albeit not with the same prevalence rate as a male, her brother. So it actually works out quite well.
I guess how would you explain the fact that like then once Bob is dead, everything goes back to normal? Like Kim can walk again, she eats again.
Methylene blue is the antidote.
Oh.
It's so interesting because on one of my rotations, for patients, if they have to go on dapsone in the second line, they have to test them for their G6PD.
I think Anna in this movie has G6PD deficiency. I do.
I thought you were gonna talk about the MP3 players, maybe.
No.
Because there's another theory that like that somehow like because they're wearing headphones in a lot of the scenes and like the earbuds, that maybe he like put some sort of whatever something to do with the earbuds. That was one of them.
I have no idea how this kid got dapsone.
Yeah.
I have to watch the
They
movie
have it
again.
like leprosy or something.
I guess would it account for like didn't he get briefly like kind of better before
I'm sorry, what?
From Bob?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the kid like kind of got better a little bit, like continued to get worse, but would that still account for it if he had the potential to?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, it depends on how much he's dosed. And what, yeah, and I don't know when. I just haven't figured that part out yet. I'll go watch it again at some point.
Is it your
Future.
theory that it's dapsone, or you know for a fact that it's dapsone?
No, it's my theory.
Oh.
This is just so, when you're approaching a future rotation, you see G6PD deficiency as a single best answer, and you see X-linked, you're like, oh, that's my psychiatry. We're going to stop here and then set things up for our case conference. We'll go forward with that. Thank you, everybody.